Morning YouTubers, this is Charles from Hellcat Entertainment and 1904 Ludes bringing you another how-to video. Today we will be installing this lovely Seibon carbon fiber trunk. Check out that weave. Seibon's are really known for making quality carbon fiber products. They've been in the industry for years. We'll be putting this right on Trinity back here, and let me show you what we will need to get started. Alright, to get the job done, you for sure will need a 10mm socket. You could either use a drill or a socket wrench, and that's going to be able to be needed to take the old latch off the old trunk and transfer it to the new Seibon trunk. If you have a spoiler and you want to put a spoiler on, you are going to need a 13/64 drill bit with a drill, so that way you could drill the holes in the trunk to get the new spoiler bolts through. You're going to be needing tape for that, so that way we can measure everything out and mark where we're going to drill, and of course you need the marker to mark it. If you do not want to use a spoiler, these tools here are not going to be necessary, and all you're going to need is a 10mm socket. Alright, so first things first, I do have a spoiler, so whether you have an aftermarket spoiler or a factory spoiler, the first thing you're going to want to do is remove the 4 bolts to get the spoiler off. After we remove the spoiler, you're then going to want to disconnect the latch cable from the latch and feed it through the skeleton of the trunk and get that latch cable removed. After removing the latch cable, you're going to want to then remove the wiring to any spoiler that may have a third brake light. If you don't have a third brake light and don't intend on using a third brake light, then you could just cut the wire here and tape it off. That's what I'm going to do, is I'm just going to cut the wire off. I don't intend to ever have a spoiler with a third brake light anymore. So then after all the cable and the wiring is removed, then the last step is going to be to remove the 4 bolts that mount the trunk to the rails, and voila, the trunk will come off. Alright, so let's get this spoiler off. Alright, next side. Make sure we tilt it down a little bit. We don't want the spoiler falling. In there. Alright. Now we should be able to just pop this bad boy straight up. I do have lots of Dynamat around here. So we got the spoiler off. Next we'll get the cable off. Alright, so here we need to take off the latch cable itself from the latch assembly. So you just unhook it from the little lever that's right here. This little release lever. You just need to pull it down, and then you'll just wind out the little ball, and then you could pry the latch cable off the latch assembly. Like so, and then you feed the cable out of the trunk assembly, and you can leave it hanging onto these rods because the fact that once you get the new trunk on, you're going to want it mounted there anyways. Next step we're going to do is, like I said, I am not going to use a third brake light on this vehicle ever, so I traced the harness to here. I'm going to cut the harness right there, remove the clips, and after removing the clips, I'm just going to let this cable come out with the trunk. Otherwise, what you need to do is, if you had a third brake light, after you remove the spoiler with the third brake light, this wire should be able to feed out of the trunk, pull it out. You could leave it clipped here if you're going to use the third brake light on the new trunk install, or unclip it there, and then I would say tie it off here if you do ever plan on using a third brake light. Like I said, I'll never have one, so I'm just going to cut mine. I'm going to cap the wires and make sure the wires aren't exposed, and then get it off the trunk here. Alright, so I got that brake light cable cut, and I got it removed from the rods. So now with this gone, and with the trunk cable itself gone as well, I should be able to take these 4 bolts off here to remove the trunk lid and get it off the vehicle. Alright, let's just remove the trunk lid. And voila! Alright, so now that I have the old trunk off and the new trunk sitting here, I'm going to have to start measuring and getting everything set so I can put this spoiler on. So what I'm going to start off doing is I'm going to tape up this area here, and I'm going to tape up the area on the opposite side there, so that way I can start drawing on it and making measurements for the 2 holes on each side where the spoiler is going to be mounted through. Let me get the tape going. I just want to tape up the side, make sure it's nice and flat. They're kind of thick. Trace where the spoiler base goes. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side here. This is also going to help with the drilling. When we get to drilling, it's going to make sure that the drill holes are clean. Alright. So now with the tape set, let's get the spoiler back on here and let's start making some drawings. So before drilling any holes, you definitely want to measure twice and cut once, as I said in a previous video. You're going to want to measure the tip of the spoiler here to the edge and make sure that it's equal on both sides, so that way you know the spoiler is centered. The cool thing about this spoiler is there's a little hangover lip right here that just hangs off the edge of the trunk, and that way you know that it's going to be equal on both sides moving forward. And then from side to side, just measure both edges and make sure there's equal distance here on both sides. If you're using a factory spoiler, then you're just going to want to measure up higher because it does not sit off the edge of the trunk. So you'll just want to measure, up here to do so. But now I'm going to trace a line around the spoiler so I know where it's going to sit. I'm going to do that on both sides. Alright, so to try to make this easier, I thought I'd be able to trace out on the old spoiler and get it to work. Trying to make this the quickest and the easiest way to get the template here so I know where I'm going to be drilling the holes. So I did measure this trunk right at the curve to the top of the curve there, and I measured this trunk at the curve and the curve, and they are identical in width, surprisingly, which that's pretty cool. That means Seibon made almost an exact replica of this trunk with exact dimensions, which that's pretty awesome. So what I did now is I'm running a tape right along the edge here, and I will be able to mark off where the holes are. Right there. I'll be able to mark off the hole there, and then I'm going to mark right at the top of the curve here, right before it starts to curve, so that way I know where to line up the tape on the other trunk. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Mark off the hole, mark off the hole, and then again we'll see the top of the curve. And it's going to be like so, and it's perfectly straight and flush along the edge there. So I'm going to take these off and I'm going to put them on the new trunk, and then I'm going to measure everything with the tape measure on this trunk and the other trunk and see how well they lined up. So after tracing the templates on the other trunk down there, I was able to put them on here. I lined them up perfectly with the curve on both sides, so those are good to go. And then I compared measurements after putting the template down from the holes here to the holes compared there, and they do match up very well. I mean, maybe like a millimeter off, if that. So that gives me enough marks now that I am going to continue on, and I'm going to drill these holes out on both sides. Got a little drill there and a drill in the black spot there, and that should give me enough room to get some bolts through to line up the spoiler. I will most likely need to do some shaving on the inside of this trunk because the bolts, the bolt heads will need to go through that, you know, like the frame, the support of this trunk. So let's get to drilling. Cool, so we got the holes drilled. I originally mentioned that we were going to use a 13/64 drill bit. That is a little bit too small, so I leveled up to a 1/4 inch drill bit, and that is the perfect size to make sure that these bolts slide in nice and secure. Now, because of the way that the shell on the frame of this goes, you can see I drilled through there, but the bolt is not going to be long enough to get through. It's just shy of going through there, whereas this back one does have plenty of room to grab onto the spoiler there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mock up the spoiler with these 2 back bolts on both ends, just to check the fitment and make sure the drilling was good. Awesome. So I have the bolts, like I mentioned, the back bolts finger tight on both sides. They fit without any adjustment, and I measured again here and here, and we have identical specs of just under 1/2 inch on both sides, so that is perfectly centered. That is going to look bitchin' once we get it on. So one of 2 things is going to happen now. I'm either going to get some longer bolts to go through this hole here, or I might shave, let me get that focused, or I might shave this a little bit wider like I did on the old trunk, so that way I could get the head of the bolt through there and mount it through there, which that's probably what I'm going to do. Is I'm probably just going to drill a lot bigger of a hole just right here, so the head of the bolt and the socket can fit through there, and I could tighten it a lot easier that way. But so far so good. After we get the bolts in and fitted, and I know I'm not going to be drilling this trunk anymore, the next step is I'm going to give this over to Kenzie, and she's going to work her magical Galaxy Touch underneath, and then I'll throw a clear coat on it, so that way we could transfer the latch after and get it mounted back in the car. Just finished cutting and drilling. So you can see, like I said, I just took care of the skin on the bottom side here. The hole on the front is still a 1/4 inch hole on the front. I used a fatty 3/8 drill bit to make the pilot hole, and I just kind of kept circling it to open it enough so that way the head of the bolt will fit in there, and I will have room to put the socket in there as well. So you can see there's plenty of room. That way I'll be able to tighten the spoiler properly. Did it on both sides here. You can see putting in the bolt right there, trusty socket, and twist. Cool. So now that that's done, I'm going to turn it over once again. I'm going to make sure all 4 holes line up to mount the spoiler. Then I'm going to unmount the spoiler for the last time, wipe this down with some rubbing alcohol, clean it up. I'm going to tape off the Seibon here and the Seibon logo there, and then we're going to have Kenzie do the Galaxy paint to it before I transfer over the actual latch assembly itself. Let's get to it. We are rocking and rolling. So the spoiler is on with all 4 bolts. Boom, boom. Boom and boom. Had to make a couple micro adjustments, but it is good to go. It is perfectly centered on the trunk lid. So now I'm going to remove it. I'm going to tape off the edges here on the back side and take it inside, so that way we can galactify the inside of it. Kenzie working her Galaxy magic on the inside of the trunk. So while Kenzie's in there galactifying the trunk underside, I'm going to take this latch assembly off. Very straightforward. Gonna need to just take the 2 10mm bolts off, unhook the switch, and call it a day. And we'll also be transferring over these rubber stoppers that just twist out. So I'm deciding I am not going to transfer over my lock cylinder. So to get the lock cylinder rod off, you're going to push that little rod over just like the door handles, pop it off. That will allow you to pull out the latch. And then we're going to do the same thing, unlatch it from here, pop it out, and there's no longer a rod. So that way I'm just going to use the latch. If you wanted to, you could use that 1 bolt take out the lock cylinder and then drill a hole in the carbon fiber trunk. It does have a mount for the lock cylinder if you wanted to attach it. I'm choosing not to, so I could keep it a clean look, and the only way I'll be able to open the trunk is through the trunk latch inside the car. So when you guys saw earlier, I cut my cables right here because I had said I wasn't going to have a third brake light without forethought of the actual trunk switch itself having an electrical connector as well that lets you know in the instrument cluster if your trunk is open or not. So it's going to be a pretty quick fix. I'm not going to actually wire it up, but you'll see two wires. There's going to be an orange one and a black one. Essentially, when the trunk is open, this is an open circuit. When the trunk gets closed, this is a closed circuit, and it touches those two wires. So with it set right now, my trunk open light will always be on, but I'm just going to take these two wires, the orange and the black one, right in here, and I'm just going to tap them together permanently, which then should stop my light from coming on. I don't really care for that light. I know when my trunk is open, I know when it's closed. You know, it's just one of those dummy lights that Honda needed to make out of the factory, so I'm literally just going to tap those two wires together and call it a day. If you are wanting to keep that functionality and everything, then you would not want to cut this, and you want to leave it running, so that way you could have the wire to the trunk switch itself. Shoo! Finished working the magic, Galaxy Magic. Now I just got to take it outside, spray on a few layers of clear coat, let it dry, transfer the latch, and mount it. Ooh-wee. So we laid down that clear coat. You can see how well this Galaxy paint looks now. Very nice. So the next step is, after this dries, I'm going to be putting the latch assembly back on, putting the two little rubber stopper pieces, then get it lined up with the rods, the trunk mount rods, so we could get the trunk latch cable back to the latch. Alright, so here we have the little bump stops twisted in. Got the two 10 millimeters put in on the latch itself. Paint is nice and dry, so it's time to bring it over to Trinity and get the mounts here lined up and get her mounted before putting the spoiler on, and that way we could run the latch cable itself as well. Alright, so this part, to get it on the actual trunk rods, mounting rods themselves, it's probably best with two people. I was able to do it by myself. I just put a blanket back there to have the trunk lid resting on the blanket, lifted up one side at a time and got the bottom bolt finger tight just a little bit, then got it finger tight on that side, and then that allowed me to then line it up to put the other two bolts in. So now we got that good. And then the cable, trunk latch cable that was hanging down, really just routed it back where it was in the old trunk, through the hole there. It's a really tight cable, really stiff, so you could push it, and when you push it, you could then grab it up here very easy, fish it through the hole, and clip it back into place. So everything is good in that respect. Going to need to do a little bit of adjustments, slide it around, because on this side it's a little bit closer to the edge than on this side. So I'm just going to loosen up all four of the bolts and then see if I could slide it to the left here. Alright, so I made some adjustments. I was able to loosen those all up and kind of twist and turn the trunk a little bit to adjust it a bit, and also kind of like bend this arm up. And that way it's pretty flush and as equal as it's going to get in regards to sitting correctly. So now the final step is to get the rear spoiler put back on here. Just going to be able to line it up, best again with two people, so one could hold the spoiler for you. Line it up, put the little bolts in, and that should call it a wrap. The thing is, if you have the normal springs, retainers for this trunk, this is a lot lighter of a trunk, so do be cautious. It does spring up rapidly. I'm hoping that with the spoiler on there, it's not going to be as rapid, but it still might spring up pretty quick, so just keep that in mind when doing this. Alright, spoiler is on, and I think that looks bitchin'. Just Need to wait till it cools down a little bit, clean up the car, but that's a good look right there, for sure. Carbon fiber, all things. Mirror coverage, side skirts, front lip. Oh yeah. All right, everybody, well, that completes the install of the Seibon carbon fiber trunk and spoiler on Trinity. If you liked what you saw, please hit that like button down below. Leave a comment and let me know what you thought about it. Let me know if there's any other how-to videos you would like to see done, and please subscribe to the channel. I'll be making a lot more. Peace.